guys, I just want to say a massive thank you for watching a day in the life of an SAP consultant. Based on your feedback, I'm going to talk about now a day in the life of an ABAP developer. I just want to clarify for the record, I am not an ABAP developer, I am a functional consultant, but obviously with my job, I have worked closely with ABAP developers, depending, on the project, so I can give you a high level overview of what they do on a day-to-day basis. I just want to say, if you have any questions or anything like that, please reach out, please write a comment. I really appreciate it. I never thought that my knowledge about my job would come in handy, but clearly there's a little bit of a gap in the market, so happy to help, not a problem at all. If I don't know the answer, I will find someone who does, and all that stuff. So thanks. First things first though, what is SAP? So how, we have Apple products, pretty much businesses has, SAP as a computer system. It's mainly businesses which are in the millions, so it's not, like really small companies. And it's just that simple. It's literally like it's a computer system. So for example, you'd have your finance, you can do your procurement, your HR, quality management, your whole supply chain, like everything. It's not a chicken and egg scenario. So the business was there, and then SAP built a system to just help people run their businesses. Now I'm going to speak about the project cycle. Please note this is just a very high level, old school, waterfall approach of a project cycle. If you're on SAP projects, like for example, single tenant cloud, multiple tenant cloud, they'll say the project, go in different phases, but I'm just going to make it really basic and easy for yourself, because obviously this is probably a video that you're just taking in for information. And by the way, if you're just watching this to see what does an ABAP developer does, and you just think it's a good way to go just for a future career, then wait till the end, and then I'll talk about, what language you'd probably want to get into if you want to stay in SAP long term. So you have your design phase, your build phase, your test phase, and then menu go live. So for example, now we've got a client bid, all the big guys go in, they bid for the work, they get the work, and then we'd have functional consultants. Interestingly, you have a functional consultant. That just means it's the person who knows that part of the SAP system, so that module. So for example, myself, I know quality management, but I'd have co-workers who'd know finance, procurement, sales, production planning, and stuff like that. In SAP as well, sometimes they like to gather modules together. So for example, you would hear the term, demand to supply, order to cash, and stuff like that. Interestingly though, an ABAP developer isn't assigned to an area. It can be assigned, to anyone. Functional consultants, so obviously would prefer people who would have experience in that area, just because obviously, if they code, then they know the dependencies between their code when they change it. So let's talk about now the design phase. A functional consultant would go in. They say, okay, this is the standard SAP functionality, so depending on what the client bid did, so was it a fast template, stuff like that. But you go through the area and you'd be like, okay, in SAP we've got this functionality, can you tell me what you do? It's more about, this phase is all about gathering the requirements. You wouldn't do solution workshops straight away. You need to go gather the requirements. A functional consultant then would do a fit gap analysis. So a fit, does it fit standard? If it does fit standard, that means there's no customized developments, stuff like that. So generally a functional consultant could just set up this system by themselves, so probably don't need help from a developer. But if there's a gap, then that's when you would need to work with a developer to create something customized within SAP to fit that gap. So that's known as like a RICEF. So if you ever heard the term RICEF list, that just means it's a customized development. When you do customized development, so SAP won't support it because obviously it's customized and you've built it. Yes. So now, say for example, we're still in the design phase. I have a gap, so I'm gonna describe this gap in a functional spec. Normally functionals anyway would have functional specs for each different areas, but obviously you write this functional spec for this RICEF, you document all the requirements, how you'd want it to be built and stuff like that. Then you'd go across to the developer, you'd be like, hi, this is what I want. You know, they would review it, obviously give you like, you know, the best ways around it, like function modules and stuff like that, how to make it the most efficient. But then based off of all the requirements you document in the functional spec, they can read it, take it in, they'd write their own technical spec to align with it. So now, right, so we've done the design phase, all the requirements gathering, creating all the documents like solution design document as a functional. Developers at this point would just create their technical specs, okay, ready for when they get into it. And then we go into the build phase. So the build phase is when you pretty much start doing your configuration. And so I would do my functional configuration and my developer would do their technical configuration. And then you just pretty much, obviously my developer at this point would be building it already. And then in the build phase as well, so once an ABAP developer, so for example, I'm just going to talk about myself as if I'm an ABAP developer because it'll be a lot easier. So I've built my development now. I obviously taken my tech back. I've built my development. I've done my unit testing. This is the phase that you start doing all your unit testing in. Once I finish my unit testing, I'd pass it over to the functional consultant, which would do their functional unit testing. So aka, does it actually fit the requirement? So at this point then, the functional consultant and the developer would work back and forth to make sure then that any defects that the functional finds, that it fixes. Okay, so that is just the build phase. Then when you go into the test phase is more like system testing. So that's, you know, within the system, within the various modules. So for example, QM, the other areas that interact like P2P, production planning. Okay, so I'm going to test this development, you know, it's in system test now. In the other areas, does it work? Is it fit for purpose? If at any point I get a defect, I would then go back to my developer. My developer would have to fix it in the dev system. When he's fixed it in the dev system, we test it there. We then transport it then into the system test system. So obviously, you know, in SAP, you'd have different clients because you're building the system. So you'd have, you know, more like a dev client, a system test client, a system integration client. And by the way, when you're in your development client, you'd have a configuration client and a test client as well. So for example, you transport your changes across. It sounds very technical, it's not, it's just, trust me, if you ever do it and you need me to explain transports a bit more, I'll happily go for it. But it's pretty much, you know, you build the functionality, then you move it into a client to actually test the functionality. Then you're like, okay, we're happy. Let's go into the other client then. Okay, right, we've done this testing. Let's move into the other client. Okay, yeah, we're happy with this testing. Let's move into the technical go live client and then the go live. You know, you just have different clients for different phases of your project. Okay, so we've done system testing. Again, if I find anything, I'll bring it back to the developer. Yeah, but pretty much then the developer is just on hand to fix the problem. So then if I do system integration testing, so for example, if SAP got legacy systems, if the SAP landscape is being integrated with legacy systems, example, old systems from the business then. But yeah, that's pretty much a developer, that's all they do. Is not all they do. Obviously, they're just on hand then to make sure that they're there to fix any defects we find during testing. Where there is more the functional, actually testing this, working with the business and stuff like that. The developer mainly just works with the functional consultant. And don't get me wrong, they will come into some meetings, but in general, it's not needed as much. They're more, you know, in the background a bit more, getting it done. You would have a technical lead that manages all the developments, which would go to the daily stand-ups and like obviously update the whole team on how the developers are doing. But yeah, that is pretty much what a developer does on a day-to-day basis throughout the project cycle. Obviously, there's a lot more to it, but that's just a high level of their deliverables. I'm going to talk about now is that the way SAP is going. So the way SAP is going, like especially, you know, if people want to move into the cloud, ABAP is very limited in the cloud. The reason why they're doing this is so they stick more to standard. So if you did want to, you know, look at a long-term career in SAP, JavaScript is a better coding language to have, unless you are going to continue, depending what industry you're in, and if it requires a lot of customized developments. Like, for example, if it's like, you know, I think it's single tenant, and like, you know, completely on-prem and stuff like that. And then that allows you to be more customizing. But if you want to go more into the cloud space, JavaScript is the coding language to go, because SAP is set up with all like Fury dashboard. So I hope it really helped.